black and gold tonight. Yellow pumpkin, yellow moon, yellow candlelight. Jet black cat with golden eyes, shadows black as ink. When the world turns black and gold, then it's Halloween.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Leslie Kaiser with Bloomington Parks and Recreation, and we'd like to welcome you to the 26th Annual Festival of Ghost Stories. I just want to take this time to quickly thank K&S Country Market, who donated all the wonderful cider that's in the atrium. If you haven't had a chance to get some, there's plenty more, hot and cold. We just ask that you drink it back there in the atrium.
Okay. And my name is Dana Burton. I'm a member of the Bloomington Storytellers Guild and a staff member at the Monroe County Public Library, and we'd like to welcome you to this facility. We're sorry that we can't be at Bryant Park, but I think you'll have a good time tonight anyway. The 26th Annual Festival of Ghost Stories will continue next year as the 27th and on and on. So those of you, how many people have been here before to the Festival of Ghost Stories? Okay, some return members. Anybody who's here for the first time? Oh, great. This is wonderful. You are in for such a great treat. We do want you to know that there are bathrooms down the hallway. And if you're leaving, you'll still need to go out the Kirkwood door. The rest of the facility is closed tonight. And we will start tonight's program. Jenny, are you doing it? Jenny Ritchie from the Monroe County Library and Bloomington Storytellers Guild. It's our first teller.
I had actually expected to tell you something else, but here we are in the library, and I got to thinking about how very mysterious and spooky libraries really are. You don't think about this. When you come into the library during the day, you see people coming and going. It's full of life and activity. Kids are laughing. Folks are chatting at the circulation desk. They're having a good time. And you don't really think about how strange a place a library really is. It's not until we close and we send everybody home and the librarian is the only one left, and the long stacks are dark and full of silence and shadows. And at that point, you begin to think, row upon row, there are little containers there. And inside each container is encapsulated the thoughts and words and creative expression of someone who's long dead. You walk through the stacks, you pick up a book, and it tickles you. You start to laugh, and then you look at the author's name, and you realize that you read his obituary last April in the Times. Or you pick up another book, and a couple of pages into it, it touches you, and you start to feel sad, and suddenly you realize that you're being moved by the thoughts and the ideas that came from someone centuries ago. It's very strange. It's strange how you can bring these words and thoughts from the dead to life again. Or even more spooky, you can put on a recording and hear the voice that was actually silenced years ago. Or you can put on a recording, you can actually see the body, you can see the gestures and the smile and the light in the eyes when you know that that person is long passed from the living. Isn't that kind of weird, mysterious? So don't you know there are going to be lots of stories about spooky events in libraries? As it happens, I've collected a lot of these, and I thought I'd tell you one to start us off with from the University of Nebraska. Now, this is a well-documented story, and if anybody's interested in footnotes, I'll give you my citations afterwards. It is, after all, a university story. It involves a young researcher who had occasion to go to the music library. At that time, the music building was still a very old building. It was a 3-story building, and the music library was on the very top floor. The researcher liked to go to that building because it was old, because she was a historian and she was drawn to old things, and she enjoyed stepping into that old building and feeling its history around her. She liked the way the wooden floors creaked. She liked the way that you could hear the music coming from the practice room, so that when you stepped in the building, you had a sound of someone doing scales coming up over here and someone doing a violin piece over here. And as she climbed up the stairs, because it was an old building with no elevators, it seemed like the notes of a piano were following her up, and the halls were full of students chatting and talking. But she was out of breath by the time she reached the third floor. And she turned then to go into the music library. And as she stepped into the library, suddenly, it was as if she had become blind and deaf. She could see nothing. Her eyes were open, but it was all dark. And she could hear nothing. It was like cotton wool had been stuffed in her ears. And she had the sensation that if she took a step, she would be stepping into an endless drop. That sort of sensation you have in nightmares sometimes. And you can't help yourself but take another step. And you know you're going to just drop. She did take another step, but underfoot was solid wooden floor. And as she strained, slowly, sight came back. And she could see the familiar library in front of her. And there was a young woman up on a ladder over there, reaching up to get a book. And she came into focus slowly. She could see it clearly. And then she noticed that the woman was wearing some sort of a costume, strange costume, a long black skirt and a high-collared white blouse. And the woman turned to look at her, and she could see her mouth open, but still she couldn't hear a thing. She turned around to look at the circulation desk. It was an old polished oak desk, and behind it a young man was rising up. He too was wearing some kind of funny dark costume, and he had whiskers that came clear down below his ears like this. And on his face was a look of total horror. And she thought, he can see there's something wrong with me. I've got to get some air. Now this was an old building, which meant that it had big, old, heavy windows, but ones you could really open. And so she turned to walk over to the window that she knew was right over there and to open it. But as she looked out the window, where was the science building? That very solid, brand new science building made of concrete and steel and glass that was right outside that window when she walked in the door was gone. Instead, she saw a grassy field. She saw a dirt road. She saw a wheat field going on where student housing stood now. She would have thought, actually, that she was looking at a picture of some sort, except that she could see the wind in the wheat. And she thought, I've got to go home and lie down. I just have to go lie down. And she turned and made it out of the library, and as she stepped out of the door, it was like a curtain going up. Suddenly, sound returned. People were walking by, they were talking, they were laughing. She could still hear the piano notes floating up the stairs. And instead of going home to lie down, she went to the student health building and got herself checked out. And they said, overwork, take it easy. And she told all her friends, and they said, stress, you need a drink. And she knew that it actually had happened to her, but she decided to put it aside, and she did slow down a little. She did reduce some stress a little, until about 2 months later, she had occasion to pick up a book on the university's history. And she happened to, she was picking it up because someone had left it out on a table, and as she picked it up, it was kind of interesting. She was a historian. She opened it up. It opened to a picture showing the new music building when it had been built in the last century. It looked pretty much the same. Behind it, she saw the dirt road and the wheat field that she had seen out the window. And she had never seen that picture before. And then she read on. And she read little anecdotes about the first librarian, little notes about the donors and the books that had formed the nucleus of this library. And she read that shortly after the music library had opened, an apparition had appeared in it that was seen by 2 librarians in broad daylight. And at that point, she knew that she had not only seen ghosts, she had been one.
Good evening. I'm Christina Jensen, and I also have a story to tell that is purported to be true. This is a story that's often told by a storyteller named Lee Pennington. He's from Kentucky. And when Lee tells this story, he often introduces it as a true story that he heard as a child about people in his own family. And the story is about a family that lived years ago in Kentucky. There was a mother and a father, and a daughter and a son. And the daughter was the older of the 2, and she was quite beautiful. And at the time that this story took place, the mother had noticed by her daughter's way of moving and speaking that her little girl was almost a woman. Well, one day, the girl fell ill, and the mother tried to care for her. She gathered herbs and brewed teas, but the girl just got sicker and sicker. And sometime that night, while her mother slept, the girl's spirit left her, and she died. Well, in the morning, when the mother awoke, she went into the girl's room, and the girl's once rosy cheeks were gray, and her lips were a dull, icy blue. And when the mother reached out to touch her daughter's hand, it was deadly cold. Well, later that day, the father and the son headed out to the woods with their shovels. And they went to a clearing in the woods where there were 7 vertical stones, all homemade, with names and dates etched into them. And there they dug her grave. And when they returned to the house, they found that the mother was standing on the back porch. Her eyes were pained with grief. And she said, "You can use the cedar box, the one made for me." So the father and the son went out to the barn, and they climbed up in the loft and found the cedar coffin. And it was long and narrow, and it was lined from top to bottom in calico cotton. Well, they eased the coffin down to the ground, and they carried it into the house and into the girl's room. And she lay silently upon the bed, dressed in a white gown. "She's wearing my wedding dress," said the mother. "She's just the size I was then." Well, they put the girl's body into the coffin. They carried the coffin out to the cemetery in the woods, and they placed it in the ground. And just as the sun was setting, the father threw the last shovelful of dirt onto the grave, and they went home. Well, the son was exhausted, so he went straight to bed and was soon fast asleep. But he was awakened in the middle of the night by a terrible scream. He sat up in his bed and he looked around the room and then out the windows toward the woods, but there was no moon, and he couldn't see anything. In a moment, there was another scream, and it was coming from downstairs. So he jumped out of bed and he ran down to his parents' room. And there was his father standing next to his mother. And her face was fevered and flushed, and her eyes were wild and bright. And when she saw her son, she said, "She's alive. She's alive. I hear her calling. We have to go to her." Well, the father and the son looked at each other in fear and confusion. And they stayed with the mother throughout the night, and they tried to console her. But in the morning, she was still screaming, still pleading, "Please, please, oh my God, I can hear her calling my name. We have to go to her, please. Dig her up before it's too late." Well, finally, the father turned to the son and he whispered, "We'll have to do it. We have to prove it to her." And so the three of them went back out to the woods, and the father and the son dug up the girl's grave while the mother watched and wept. Well, finally, their shovels reached the coffin, and using ropes, they eased it up out of the ground. And then the father took the tip of his shovel and he pried open the coffin lid, the same lid he had just nailed down the day before. And he turned and looked at the mother, and then he looked at the son, and then he slowly opened the coffin, and they peered inside. Horror-stricken, the father stumbled backward. The mother dropped her head into her hands and began to sob, and the son fell to his knees in the dirt. The girl lay in the coffin. Her dress was torn at the neck, and her face, no longer beautiful, was contorted and twisted in pain. Her fingernails were gone, and her fingers and hands were covered in blood. The coffin's calico lining was shredded, and there were fingernail marks carved deep in the wood underneath the coffin's lid. That's the story of the calico coffin.
Good evening. My name is Abby Anderson. I'm going to tell you another story that they say is true about ghosts in Indiana. West of Bloomington, about 5 miles northwest of Terre Haute, stands the campus of St. Mary of the Woods College. This is a women's college which was established by the Sisters of Providence religious community in 1841. The Sisters of Providence are still active today. They perform a variety of ministries, including workshops and retreats that are held on campus. I've been told that St. Mary of the Woods is a beautiful place. I've never been there myself, but they say it is lovely, a place of rest and peace. In the early years of the 20th century, there was a nun teaching in the college in the art department. Now, the stories about this nun no longer remember her name, so I'm going to call her Sister Mary Agnes. Sister Mary Agnes' gift was painting in oils, and she especially loved to paint portraits. When she was painting someone, she always did the face last. She didn't want to be distracted by any other details when she got to the thing that she felt was most important, the personality, who you were in your face. This was interesting because anyone who met Sister Mary Agnes would remark on her face. Not that she was particularly beautiful, for her features were rather plain, but she was the kind of person who was always paying complete attention to what she is doing or who she is with. You always felt when you were with Sister Mary Agnes that she was right there with you, present in her face. Sister Mary Agnes had a colleague in the art department named Sister Celestina. They were not only colleagues, but very good friends. They would often stay up nights when one or the other of them couldn't sleep, have a nice cup of tea, and talk over the events of the day, things our students were doing, projects they were working on, anything else that came to mind, as one should do with a good friend. Now, Sister Celestina often said to Sister Mary Agnes, "You should paint a portrait of yourself. It would be so lovely if you would do that." Sister Mary Agnes always had a reason why not. There was always something more important to do. But finally, as she grew older and her activities diminished, she decided, all right, she would go ahead and paint her own self-portrait. As was her habit, she started with the usual things, the setting, the clothing, the quality of the light, and she left the face for last. But she took ill, and she suddenly died before she had finished her own face. Now her friends grieved for her, and here they had this portrait that was Sister Mary Agnes without her face. How could that be she? How could that be her friend, their friend, who had always been so present in her face? They didn't know what to do with this painting. It was horrible to look upon because it was missing the most important part of Sister Mary Agnes. But they couldn't do away with it either. It was the last thing that she'd ever done in a lifetime of good works. So finally they set it aside in a corner of the art room and draped it over with black velvet. Now, Sister Celestina was grieving very hard for the loss of her friend. She would wake up in the middle of the night and miss her terribly. She would find herself going into Foley Hall, which was where the art department was housed, and going into that very art room and standing in front of that black velvet, and she would talk to Sister Mary Agnes, just as if they were still together. It gave her some comfort to think that perhaps Sister Mary Agnes was not so far away. Perhaps she was still paying attention. One night, Sister Celestina was walking the halls again, going towards the art room, when she looked up and saw another nun going towards the same place. And she thought, oh, here's someone who feels the way I do. Perhaps we can sit with a nice cup of tea and talk over our good memories of Sister Mary Agnes, as one should do for a dear friend. She went toward the other woman, who didn't seem to hear her quiet greeting, reached out to touch the woman on the shoulder, but then she turned. There was no face. Could this be Sister Mary Agnes? Could this be the spirit of that unfinished portrait, the unfinished business that was waiting in the art room? Sister Celestina fainted dead away on the floor, which is where they found her the next morning when the building opened for classes. They took her to the infirmary right away, and she told them her story. She never recovered from the shock of what she had seen, and she too passed away some weeks later. Now, no one wanted to believe Sister Celestina's story. How could Sister Mary Agnes be haunting this building without her face, just like that portrait, walking around? This was a terrible thing to think about. But before long, other people were seeing her too, and not just at night. It got to be a pretty common occurrence in Foley Hall to see a nun who wasn't really there and who, if she turned and looked at you, didn't have a face like that portrait. This went on for years. It got to be finally very disruptive on campus because the story spread. It got published in newspapers, and people were actually coming onto campus to see this ghost. And so finally the nuns had a special mass set, a mass of special interests to try and calm the spirit and give her some peace and settle this problem. The sightings slowly died away. It became less of a problem. They tore down Foley Hall in 1987 and built a new class building. I wonder, if we went there tonight, would we meet Sister Mary Agnes still wandering the halls seeking her face? They say that St. Mary of the Woods is a beautiful place, a place of rest and peace. But maybe not everyone there is resting in peace.
I've been there. It is very pretty. Well, as you may have figured out, I'm not going to tell you a story. As a matter of fact, my purpose is entirely different. Some of you may know me. I work in the audiovisual department. And one of the things that I love in the audiovisual department is music. And what I like to do around holidays of this nature, like Halloween, Christmas, Easter, is find those songs that are not typical of what you would normally hear. I mean, there are lots of songs that come out about this time of year. You know, the Monster Mash. Let's see, there's also another one by him called Me and My Mummy. I just found that one today. But something that is left out of Halloween all over is the family. And Halloween is really a great time for families. So I looked long and hard to find a good Halloween appropriate song for families. And I believe I found one. Some of you may know the person who wrote it. His name is Tom Lear. And it's a nice, simple little Irish ballad about a daughter and her family. About a maid I sing a song, sing rickety-tickety-tin. About a maid I sing a song who did not have her family long. Not only did she do them wrong, she did every one of them in. She did every one of them in. One morning in a fit of pique, sing rickety-tickety-tin. One morning in a fit of pique, she drowned her father in the creek. The water tasted bad for a week, and we had to make do with gin. We had to make do with gin. Her mother she could never stand, sing rickety-tickety-tin. Her mother she could never stand, and so a cyanide soup she planned. Her mother died with a spoon in her hand, and her face in a hideous grin, her face in a hideous grin. She set her sister's hair on fire, sing rickety-tickety-tin. She set her sister's hair on fire, and as the smoke and flames grew higher, she danced around the funeral pyre, playing a violin, playing a violin. She weighted her brother down with stones, sing rickety-tickety-tin. She weighted her brothers down with stones and sent him off to Davy Jones. All they ever found were some bones and occasional pieces of skin, occasional pieces of skin. One day when she had nothing to do, sing rickety-tickety-tin. One day when she had nothing to do, she cut her baby brother in two and served him up as an Irish stew, and invited the neighbors in, invited the neighbors in. And when at last the police came by, sing rickety-tickety-tin. And when at last the police came by, her little prank she did not deny, for to do so she would have had to lie. And lying she knew was a sin, and lying she knew was a sin. My tragic tale I won't prolong, sing rickety-tickety-tin. My tragic tale I won't prolong, and if you did not enjoy my song, you've yourselves to blame if it's too long. You should never have let me begin, should never have let me begin.
Well, my name is Hope, and my brother is in the audience. I'd like to tell you that after that song. Hi, Ned. My name is Hope Baugh, and I've been a member of the Bloomington Storytellers Guild for a while, but I live in Carmel, Indiana now, north of Indianapolis, and drove down to be here because I love this event, and I'm glad that you all came out for it. The story that I want to tell you was written by Roberta Simpson Brown, and it's told with her permission. She's also known as the Queen of the Cold-Blooded Tales. And this story is about two guys who were walking home from a party. Yeah, like you guys right there. Their names were Jeff and Corey. And they had been at a party, And it was almost their curfew. So instead of going the usual way home, they cut through the woods. The woods that normally people didn't go in at all anymore, day or night, because of what had happened there long, long ago. And as they were walking through the woods, they heard, "Ah!" That's what they did too. They jumped like that. And Corey turned to Jeff and he said, "Do you think that?" And Jeff said, "No, dude, it was just a story. Shut up." But Corey was thinking of the story that someone had told at the party that night, and he remembered every word. Long, long ago, there had been 3 fur trappers. Their names were Abe and Amos and Hoot Cartu. And they were very successful fur trappers. In fact, when the story began, they had just returned from town to trade their furs, and their pockets were filled with gold. Now they were back out in the woods getting ready to trap some more furs. They had made a camp in a clearing, and Abe had stretched out his sleeping bag, and Amos had stretched out his, and Hoot Cartu had stretched out his. And Abe and Amos had fallen asleep, but Hoot Cartu lay there on his back, and he was thinking about their time in town and how much he had enjoyed it. He liked sleeping on a hotel bed a lot better than sleeping on this whole cold, hard ground. And he liked the company of the women in the saloon a lot better than Abe and Amos. And it wouldn't take too much money to start a life in town and just live there all the time. But it would take more money than he had in his pockets. He would need Abe and Amos's money too. And so while they slept, he crept over and he took their money out of their pockets so carefully. And they slept on, and he loaded up his horse. And he started to lead his horse out of the clearing when up snapped something that stepped on a branch, and Abe and Amos woke up and they saw immediately what was happening, so they reached for their guns, but Hoot Cartu grabbed his guns first and he shot them, blam, blam, they were dead. "I didn't mean to do it," said Hoot Cartu aloud. They were gonna shoot me. I had to do it, I had to. Now what am I gonna do? I've got to bury him. I'll just bury him, I'll get out of here, and that'll be the end of it. Problem was the clearing was very small, and there wasn't room for 2 full graves. So Hoot Cartu decided that he would dig 1 grave, but dig it very deep, and he would put the bodies in feet first, and no one would know. So from his pack, he got out his little shovel. Maybe if you've been camping, you've seen them, they fold in half to dig your latrine. And so he dug. And the ground wasn't very hard. It was pretty easy digging. And there was a moon to help him. And he was digging and digging. And he heard a sound in the woods, in the brush. And he looked over and he could hear and he could sense something huge coming towards him, something monstrous making its way through the woods, something supernatural, I bet, said Hoot Cartu himself, and he got his gun again and he shot it, blam, and the huge monstrous creature fell to the earth. And he went over to see what he had killed. It was a cow. What am I gonna do? Someone's gonna come looking for a cow. I know, I'll put the cow on top of the corpses. No one will know. Even if they do come looking for the cow, they'll see the digging and they won't know it's a grave. They'll just think it's the cow. That's what I'll do. And so he kept digging and kept digging. And when he got a really deep hole, he pulled over Abe's body and stuck it in feet first. And he pulled over Amos's body and stuck it in feet first, covered them all over with earth, leaving just enough room for the cow. He went over and he got the cow. Where was that cow? It was over there. He went over and he got the cow. And he dragged it over, and he was pulling it over into the hole when he looked down, and the heads had come uncovered. Abe and Amos's heads were poking up out of the earth, and their eyes were open. And they seemed to be staring right at him. Well, the earth must have just settled. He covered them up again. And he pulled that cow and he put it in firmly, had it smush it in, put earth over it. And then he saddled up again. He loaded all the possessions of all 3 men onto the 3 horses, and he left and went to a town far, far away to live. The next morning, the farmer and his sons did come looking for their cow. They followed the tracks into the woods, into the clearing, up to a certain place. One of the farmer's sons said, "Daddy, I think someone's been digging here." "I think you're right, son," said the farmer. "Go get the shovel out of the wagon." And so they got a shovel and they dug, and very quickly they found their cow, and it had a bullet in it. Who would shoot a cow, they wondered. "Boys, I think we ought to pull our cow out of this hole and see if we can figure out how this happened." And so they pulled the cow out of the hole, and they were looking at it, and one of them happened to glance back down in the hole, and there were two men's heads sticking up out of the earth, and their eyes were open. And they seemed to be looking right at the farmer and his sons. And then the mouths started to move, and they said, "Hoot! Hoot! Achoo!" While the farmer and his sons took off for the sheriffs. They said, "Sheriff, sheriff, sheriff, there was a cow, and hoot, hoot!" And there were two men's heads, and their eyes open, and come and see. Sheriff hitched up his pants, and he said, "Now, boys, I've been living in these woods my whole life, and what you heard was an owl. Hoot, hoot, that's the sound that owls make. But I'll come look at your cow and see if I can help you figure out what happened." So the sheriff followed the farmer and his sons back to the clearing, and the cow was there, and the hole was there. And they looked down into that hole, and all they saw was dirt. "There were two heads," said the farmer. "We saw him, didn't we, boys?" "Oh, yeah, Daddy, we saw him. Sheriff, there were two heads down there." And while all four men were kind of peering around into the hole, suddenly they felt the ground kind of move, and they heard a noise behind them in the path where they'd come, and they all turned to look, and they saw the ground kind of shake and then split open, and two men's heads popped up out of the earth, and their eyes were wide open, and they were staring. And then their mouths started to move, and they called out, "Hoot! Hoot! Cartoo!" But the sheriff and the farmer and his sons, they didn't hear because they were gone. And Abe and Amos, well, they're still in those woods, watching, waiting. And whenever they hear footsteps, they make the ground kind of rumble, and they split open the earth, and they pop up to see if the footsteps belong to the man who had killed them. And you can imagine how this happened enough times so that now nobody wants to go in those woods. Except that night when Jeff and Corey were walking home from a party. And they weren't scared, it was just a story. And so when they heard hoots, they didn't look behind them. But if they had turned around and looked behind them, they would have seen the earth and the path start to rumble and split open, and those two heads pop up to see if finally, this was the man who had killed them.
Okay, if anybody needs to stretch out your arms, it's okay. My dad's in the audience too. We've got plans for you, Pop. No, actually, I do have a family story though to share with you guys tonight, and this is truly terrifying. They say, once upon a time, and a very long time ago it was, in the Highlands of Scotland, there lived a man and a woman, and they worked very hard and they loved each other very much. But more than anything in the world, they wanted a little baby of their own. So time went on and they were blessed with a beautiful baby boy, as married couples often are, and a finer baby you couldn't ask for. He just laughed and cooed all day. He never cried. And they were very happy with him. But then as All Hallows Eve drew near, one sunny day, they went out to harvest some wheat, and they brought the baby along because there was nobody to stay home and watch him. And they set him down in his cradle under the shade of a tree. And they started working, and after about an hour, they heard a strange sound. crying coming from the cradle. So they went back and they expected to find, a bug on his face or maybe a leaf had fallen, but there was nothing. And no matter how they rocked him or sang to him or what they did, they couldn't get him to stop crying. Just wah, 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 on and on. And finally they gave up and they had to go back home, back to their little cottage. Well, that baby cried all day and all evening, wah, 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 until midnight when he promptly closed his eyes and went to sleep. But at 6 the next morning, he woke up again, wah, wah, crying, and cried all day and all evening again until midnight and went back to sleep. And up again at 6 the next morning, same thing, day after day, week after week, until the parents thought they were going out of their minds. Some of you know what that's like. So anyway, autumn was drawing on, and they were visited by their friend, John, the postman, who'd come to see the new baby and tell him about market day in the village. And they took him inside the cottage, and they took him up to the cradle, and he looked down at this wailing baby, and he saw that its skin was sallow and wrinkled, and that in fact, it looked more like a little old man than a baby. And he thought to himself, I've heard of the fairies stealing people's babies and leaving something else in their place. I wonder if that's happened here. So he turned to the parents and he said, you need a break. Go to the village, go to market day. I'll stay here and watch the baby. The parents are like, oh, John, he'll cry all day. He'll drive you crazy. So, oh, I'm the father of 9 children. If there's one thing I can handle, it's a single wailing baby. I'll just sit here and rock the cradle with my foot. Go on. So without another word, the parents took off, ran up, settled up the cart, and phew, they were gone. But no sooner were they out of the cottage than the baby stopped crying, sat up, looked around, looked at John and said, are they gone? You talking to me? Who else is here? I said, are they gone? Yeah, they're gone, said John. Good, get the whiskey. Get the whiskey? Yeah, get the whiskey. And get yourself a glass. I know you like a good bit of whiskey, John. So John walked over to the cabinet, took down the bottle and 2 glasses, filled them both up, handed one to the baby, handed the bottle to the baby. The baby took them both in, knocked his whiskey back in a single gulp and refilled his glass. Sipped slowly. Said, tell me, John, do you know where we can meet any girls? Girls? This is the Highlands. There's no girls around for miles. Why do you think the men all walk around with a funny look in their eye? Talking to themselves and whatnot. Oh, that's too bad, said the baby. So he got up and he waddled right out of his cradle, waddled across the hard-packed floor, sat down in front of the fire with his whiskey in his glass, and stared at the flames. Tell me, John, do you like music? Well, I guess everyone in Scotland loves music. Oh, good. Then go out to the corn crib there and fetch me a good stalk of corn. So John went out to the corn crib, and while he was gone, the baby took a poker and stuck it into the fire and let it get nice and hot. And when John brought him the stalk of corn back, he kind of eyed it professionally and broke it off about this long. Then he took that poker out and burned holes all down it and made himself a lovely little flute. Then he stood up on the floor, buck naked, and started playing jigs and reels, the like of which John had never heard. Played and danced around on the floor. John said, you're no baby, are you? Drink up, John. And he went right on playing. Well, he played for hours, all day into the evening, playing and drinking and playing. And finally he stopped and said, I think I hear someone coming. Have a look out the window and see if they're coming back. So John looks out the window, and sure enough, there's the husband and his wife coming up in their cart. But he wants them to see this little naked babies with his flute and his whiskey. Oh, no, it must have been some wind or something. No one's coming. You're a liar, John McDougal. And he threw that flute into the fire, and he waddled back up, climbed into the cradle, lay down, pulled the blankets up to his chin, started screaming. Well, the parents came back in, and John took them aside and said, listen, that's no baby you've got over there. That's a Tainawa. The fairies have stolen your baby and left this thing in its place. Now here's what you got to do. Tonight, when the miserable bugger finally goes to sleep, wrap him up in a clean shawl, take him out to the river and throw him in. Parents looked at each other. You've been in the whiskey, John. No, it's no baby. I'm telling you, he's been drinking whiskey. He's playing the flute. He wants to meet girls. Well, you're pissed as a rope, you wee man. Go, take yourself to bed. No, look, he wants to meet girls, I'm telling you. Look at him. He looks like a huddled little old man. So he talked and finally convinced him. And at midnight, the baby went to sleep, and they got a clean shawl, wrapped him up, took him out, walked him out to the river where there was a steep waterfall. And they took a deep breath in, threw him over. Well, the little bundle rolled over the waterfall, but before it hit the bottom, phew, it shot up in the air. The shawl fell off, and there stood a little man on thin air with a long beard that hung down below his feet. And he shook his fist at them, and he said, "If I had known you were going to do this to me, I'd have done far worse to you when I had the chance." But John shook his fist back. "Get in the water, you wee Jesse!" And poof, the Tainawa was gone. So the three of them walked back to their cottage, and the parents were happy to be rid of the Tainawa, but they were sad because they wanted their own baby back. But when they went inside, they heard the strange sound of laughter and cooing, and they went up to the cradle, and there was their own baby boy. Because the instant they had gotten rid of the Tainawa, the fairies had returned their own baby. And he grew up fine and strong and was never bothered by the fairies again. And the four of them lived happily ever after. Thank you.
They buried Buster Williams in a cheap pine box in the heat of one of the worst summers in history. No one said anything aloud, but they knew by the end of the day that body would be rotten and smelly. Now, folks were sorry to see Buster go. They liked him a lot, they did. Everyone, that is, except for his widow, Jamie Sue. Some folks were talking about how it was strange that Buster had been seen in town that morning, healthy as a horse, and dead as a doornail that evening. Some folks had talked about how maybe Jamie Sue had had a hand in helping Buster out of this world. They knew about the large life insurance policy he held. And sure enough, no sooner had that funeral been over than Jamie Sue was seen hanging out with Willie, the piano player at the Dewdrop Inn. They were seen in town, walking hand in hand, gazing into each other's arms as if there was no one else on the planet. And every night, Jamie Sue was down at the dance hall, and she'd stay there till midnight, her loud laugh filling the air. She didn't seem to care that her neighbors were whispering and talking about her carefree ways. All of this, and Buster Williams had not been in that grave even a month. When one evening, as Jamie Sue was getting all dolled up to go down to the Dewdrop Inn, she was sitting at her dressing table putting on her makeup when she heard a strange sound. "Jamie Sue! Jamie Sue!" Well, Jamie Sue nearly swallowed her teeth, for that sound sounded for all the world like her husband, Buster Williams. She got up and peeked out the window, but there was no one there. Must have been her imagination. So she finished getting ready, picked up her black leather purse, and headed out down to the Dewdrop Inn. And her tapping feet in her high-heel silver shoes down that road. It wasn't dark, but the sun was setting fast, swinging that leather purse, humming that tune, when she heard a strange sound of dragging footsteps coming behind her, and a voice, soft as cotton. "Jamie Sue, Jamie Sue, I'm coming to dance with you." Well, Jamie Sue spun around like a top, and she peered down that dark road, and she couldn't see anybody, but it felt like something or someone was watching her, and chills ran up and down her spine, and she turned and she ran the rest of the way to the Dewdrop Inn. And when she got there, the party was in full swing. Everyone was dancing and snapping their fingers to the jazzy beat that Willie pounded out on that jazz piano, and she kicked up her heels with the rest of them. My, how that girl loved to dance. And there she was, in her red party dress, twirling around her, her silver shoes reflecting light like mirrors, and she danced and danced and danced into the night as couple after couple left the Dewdrop Inn until she and Willie were all alone. And he closed up the place, and he slid that deadbolt home and sat down at the piano to play a sweet song just for her. When a tapping came at the door. "We're closed," Willie yelled out without missing a beat. But the door began to rattle and shake on its hinges, and that deadbolt slid back with a squeak. And like magic, the door began to creak open. Jamie Sue was watching that doorway, and her hand flew to her mouth, for there in the doorway was her husband, Buster Williams, fresh from the grave. Maggots were busily crawling in and out of his eyes and his ears and his mouth. He had dirt in his hair, and dirt lay in the folds of the cheap blue suit that Jamie Sue had picked out to bury him in. One eye hung from its socket, but the other stared glassily right at her. The skin hung from his body like moss from a magnolia tree, and bits of flesh fell to the ground as he shuffled forward in a step drag, step drag, step drag. Jamie Sue, Jamie Sue, I'm here to dance with you. And he reached out two long, thin bones that used to be arms, but the flesh had long been picked away by vermin that lived in the graveyard. No, you get away. Buster, you're supposed to be dead. But he wasn't. His long, claw-like fingers reached out and grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her toward him. And he embraced her and began to dance jerkily around the dance floor. And the smell of rotten, decomposing flesh was so revolting. She gagged but managed to gasp out, Willie, help me get away. And Willie did try to help. He got up and he grabbed Jamie Sue by her other arm. But Buster, with his one good eye, fixed Willie with a stare that was evil and piercing. And he dropped that arm like it was something hot. And Buster pulled back his teeth, pulled back his lips, and revealed those yellow, rotten teeth, and growled, "Play piano, fool." And Willie played. He played as if his life depended upon it, and maybe it did. And Buster stood there. Jamie Sue stood there. She was in shock. She was staring at that eye socket that used to hold Buster's eye. She could see clean through his skull. "Dance," he said. But she couldn't move. "Dance," he demanded, and he shook her so hard that her hairpins fell onto the dance floor, and so she danced. She danced like she'd never danced before, and he danced also, if you could call it that, because his right foot had been eaten away to the ankle by a graveyard rat, and so he just hopped around on the other one in time to the music. And as he danced, he tried to dance to a fast piece, and that's when his other foot broke off at the other ankle, and the bones scattered around the dance floor. Now, at first, Jamie Sue tried to dance around them, but she found that her silver high-heel shoes were crushing the toe bones to bits. "You're stepping on my feet," he belched. She reviled, almost fainted, but he held on to her. "Keep dancing," he demanded. And she danced as fast as she could. And he danced on those two ankle stumps like they were the fanciest party shoes you'd ever had. And as he went around, he tried to spin, and his right arm came loose and sailed across the room. It hit the far wall and shattered into a fine dust that wafted down. But he just kept right on dancing, having the time. And so she danced too. And as she danced, she saw that he was falling apart bit by bit. They danced for 2 hours. Sweat poured down her face. Her hair hung in an untidy mess, and her one silver heel was missing. And Willie was playing slower and slower, and she could barely keep moving. But Buster was dancing faster and faster. He was trying fancy things like the splits, and when he did so, his left leg just fell off at the hip and landed with a clatter onto the floor. And she wiped her eyes, and as she saw that he was falling apart bit by bit, she thought, maybe I can dance him to death. "Play faster," she yelled at Willie, and she kicked off her shoes and she started dancing as fast as she could. Willie looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Play faster," she said, and she grabbed Buster by his one remaining arm. She started spinning him around and around. And when she spun him around, he threw back his head and let loose with a giggle, a high-pitched giggle of delight. And his tongue, black and swollen, rolled out of his mouth and hung by a thread of skin. And he danced, and she danced, and Willie played. Willie's hands were red and swollen, but they moved in a blur of motion up and down the piano. And the action was non-stop. Round and round they went until the music stopped. All that was left of that Buster was a skull spinning around in time to the music. But Willie had fainted. He had slumped over the piano. The music had stopped. Jamie Sue had stopped, but the head kept spinning. So Jamie Sue, she reached out, she grabbed that skull by the hair, and she held it up eye level. And that one good eye rolled open and fixed her with a stare that froze her blood. and he said, Jamie Sue, Jamie Sue, I want to dance with you. And she said, we're through dancing, Buster. And she hauled back with all her might, and she flung that head against the far wall, and it flew across the room, and it hit one of the side walls, and there it bounced off the boards and down onto the floor and started rolling around until it got rolling right toward her. It rolled toward her. Jamie Sue, I wants to dance with you. And Jamie Sue, seeing it was no end in sight, screamed bloody murder and ran out that door as fast as she could, with that head rolling and clanking and clunking behind her, down into the night, saying over and over again, Jamie Sue, I want to dance with you.
You're still here. I gave you a chance to escape. I left. Anyway, as I said, I like to collect songs that are maybe a little different for the holidays. And, you know, there is another emotion that is usually sadly lacking in Halloween. Love. There are very few love songs written about Halloween or that take place around Halloween. And of course, I managed to find one. And it's a nice little song called I Hold Your Hand in Mine. I hold your hand in mine, dear. I press it to my lips. I take a healthy bite of your dainty fingertips. My joy would be complete, dear, if you were only here. But still I keep your hand as a precious souvenir. The night you died, I cut it off. I really don't know why. For now, each time I kiss it, I get bloodstains on my tie. Yeah. I'm sorry now I killed you, for our love was something fine. But till they come and get me, I will hold your hand in mine.
A tasty song that was. Not tasteful, but tasty. The story that I have to tell you tonight is a story that comes from the Philippines. It takes place more than 100 years ago. Now, there was an English traveler, a man who thought of himself as quite an intellectual and a scholar, and of course a world traveler. And he had heard stories about an area around the Philippines where supposedly there were cannibals. Now, he had heard that these beings looked very much like humans, but that they could take on a spirit form when they went out hunting. And so he booked passage to the remote island of Cagayan, Zulu, in the Sulu Sea. When he got there and told the inhabitants what he wanted to do, they said, don't look for them. They really are. They really exist. He kind of poo-pooed that. He didn't believe what they had to say. I mean, he was an intellectual after all. So he begged for someone to take him to see these other beings that lived on the other side of the island. No one would go. But they did tell him that the Burbalangs, as they were called, would take on their ghostly form whenever they wanted human flesh. And the thing to do was to listen, because from far away they made a moaning sound. And the closer they got, the quieter they were. The only thing that you could protect yourself with was called a coconut pearl. Well, this man, Andrew Simmons, said, well, he would gladly buy a coconut pearl, or if someone would give him, he didn't really care one way or the other. And they said, oh, no, it can't be given, it can't be bought, you must find one yourself. Well, he didn't want to bother with that. It was also said that if you took a little lime juice and put it on your knife, called a crease, if you put a little lime juice on the knife, that would keep them back a bit, and you might be a little bit safer. Well, all of this he heard and was very amused. But again, as he asked somebody to take him there, they refused. Finally, he did find a young man named Matali, and Matali agreed to show him where the Burbalangs lived. Well, they started out one morning, and they started crossing the rough terrain of the island. About noon, they finally got to within a half of a mile of the village of the Burbalangs. And Matali said, I'll not go any closer. Oh, man, well, I want to get in there. I haven't come all this way to stop here. I want to go on in. Well, Matali took his crease, his knife, and he smeared a little lime juice on the blade, and he gave that to Simmons. And so Simmons, with the knife, strolled up to the village. It looked very ordinary. There were probably 24 huts there, but there was no one around. He looked in some of the huts, and they seemed very ordinary. In fact, in one of them, there was some hot rice, cooling, still warm. And he knew that the inhabitants couldn't be too far away, but all he saw were a few chickens and a goat. Disappointed, he went back to where Matali was waiting. Matali said, oh, that means that the Burbalangs are hunting. They've taken on their spirit form, and they are hunting for human flesh. We must leave as soon as possible. And so Matali grabbed Andrew Simmons' arm and dragged him away from the village. It was getting dark, and yet, as they crept through the shadows, they started hearing something. It is them. It is the Burbalangs. They're out. The moaning grew fainter. Matali grabbed Simmons by the arm, and he squeezed. He said, they are getting closer. They knelt down in the shadows, and then Simmons saw dancing red lights moving over the grass. That is the Burbalangs, said Matali. Their eyes. The moaning was now a silence, as the flickering red lights seemed to stop over part of the grassy field and circled. Matali was holding his breath, and Simmons, too, could feel the fear of the young man, and they stayed as quiet and as still as possible. Soon the flickering red lights left, and soon they heard but it was a relief. The Burbalangs were getting further away. Matali, we must go! We must go now! We must hurry as quickly as possible before they see us. We are lucky this time. And so, through the shadows, they went running the long way back to the village. And they were almost there when they heard it again. And as they got closer to the village, the moaning died down. An isolated house off to the side was just covered with flickering red lights. They looked like sparks coming out of a chimney. And Matali and Simmons stopped briefly, and Simmons said, "We must go. We must go see it if we can help those people." "No, it is all right," said Matali. That is Hassan, and Hassan has a coconut pearl. He will be safe." And so they hurried on to the safety of the village. Now, the next morning when Simmons got up, he kind of chided himself. It seemed kind of silly now. And he asked Matali about what they'd seen the night before. And Matali confessed to Simmons that he had lied. Hassan, the man who lived in the house, Matali explained, was a scholar who had just come to the island himself. He had come to study the culture and the ways of the people. He too had been interested in the story of the Burbalangs. "Ha! A man after my own heart," said Simmons. "I shall go over and have a nice chat with him." And so Simmons headed out for the isolated house. He got up to the door and knocked on it, but no one answered. And so Simmons found the door ajar, and so he just kind of pushed it in and, "Hello? Hello, Hassan, old man." There was no answer. Simmons walked on into the hut. The bamboo blinds were pulled, and so it was dark and shadowy in the hut. He could make out a desk, and the desk was covered with papers and stacks of books. Simmons went on through the hut. In a corner of the hut was a bed. And on that bed, a figure sat, its fingers clutching the covers up to its neck. A few bits of flesh hung from the now bare skull. Simmons backed away from the horrible, horrible sight. He backed away. He was sick. He went to the door. He turned around just in time to look over the grass and the shimmering heat. and to hear. And to see flickering lights, and to hear the moaning growing fainter. And then there was silence, and Andrew Simmons heard no more.
I may have mentioned before that I collect haunted libraries, stories about haunted libraries, not the actual physical library, stories. And I am proud and pleased to tell you that Indiana has the most famous haunted library of all. It is not this one. Just to lay your minds at rest. It also has the oldest library building still in use as a library. And interestingly enough, this is a public library that is not funded by public funds. It's an entirely privately funded library. You can find this haunted library in Evansville, Indiana. It's called the Willard Library, and it is, in fact, a very decorated, old Victorian Gothic building. And it wasn't haunted to begin with. It was started by a wealthy businessman who became a philanthropist and wanted to build a university. He didn't have quite that much money, so he built a library. Just as good. And for many, many years, there were no unusual stories. It was in the 20s that the first sighting happened. In the 20s, the library was entirely heated by coal, and it was the job of the custodian every night or every morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning, to go and start the coal fire burning. It took that long to get that big old building warm enough for people to come in to work in the morning. So one night, he went to the library, as he always did, went with his flashlight, went in, let himself in with his key, locked the door behind him, went down the stairs to the basement, and almost tripped over a figure standing there. It startled him so much he dropped his flashlight. He thought, of course, it was one of those hobos, this was the 30s, and that this was someone that had just come in to sleep. He picked up his flashlight, all ready to be really mad, shone his light on a woman. A woman dressed with a gray shawl around, all in gray, standing there. And before he could say anything, in the light of his flashlight, she vanished. So did he. But he was running out the door. And one story says that he quit on the spot and never went back in, which is what I would have done. And other stories say that he saw her several times before he quit, but he quit anyway. The children's librarian, however, was not scared of the gray lady, as she came to be called, and saw her quite often. The children's librarian served that library for 50 years. She had plenty of time to get really well acquainted with the gray lady. Sometimes she would see her in the children's department is in the basement, so all this is in the basement of the library. She would see her passing behind stacks, or when she didn't see her, she would smell that old-fashioned perfume that she wore. And when the building was renovated, she knew that the gray lady was upset because she had the feeling that she'd followed her home one day. And at her home, she could smell the gray lady's perfume. And so she thought the gray lady had probably been so upset she followed her home. Fortunately, when the renovation was done, the gray lady must have followed her back because she was then seen again, this time upstairs. Now, you may think this all happened a long time ago, but about 20 years ago, they put a security system in the library with motion detectors. The director thought there must be something wrong with this security system. It keeps going off. One night, the director was called by the company that said there's something going, your security system's going off, and he met the police, as he usually did. And one of the policemen stayed outside and the other one went in with him, and they went through the building looking for any activity. From room to room to room they went. They cleared the building, no one was there, but as they walked out the door, the policeman who had stayed outside said, "Well, did you get her?" There was no one in the building, they said. "Oh yeah, there was," he said. "I saw this lady in this long dress and she was walking by the window there in the tower." They thought maybe it was you mean the gray lady, they said? Like, he maybe heard the story and he was having them on, but he wasn't from Evansville. He hadn't heard the story. He had just seen her. Well, just a few years ago, a team of paranormal investigators spent the night in the library, and they set up special detectors that do something with magnetism. And they'd also observed their detectors detecting something in the library. You too can watch for ghosts in the library, because now, in the modern era, they're online. They have ghost cams. There are cameras 24 hours a day, one in the reference area, one in the children's area, and the best one in the dark basement. 24 hours a day, you can log on and you can see if you spot anything unusual in the Willard Library. Now, they also give you instructions for capturing the image and sending it to them if you think you've seen something. So when you go online to the Ghost Cam, be sure to check out the gallery of pictures and see what you think of the pictures that people have captured and sent in to them. You can read the whole story online, but there's more to it. There's more than we have time to tell today. I want to tell you where you can find out more besides that. I have a book called Haunted Indiana. There's a videotape too that's in our audiovisual department, and the book you'll find in the children's department along with many, many others. There are stories, and you've heard some today that you know are stories, but there also are books that are true sightings. They're things that just can't be explained. And we invite you to come to this not too haunted library to find out all about the real haunts that are out there. And be sure to look up the Willard Library, Evansville, Indiana. Make a great field trip, wouldn't it? You can go down there and spot the ghost yourself. Such an opportunity. We are so glad you came tonight. Thank you so much for listening to us. We've enjoyed telling these stories. We want to thank Parks and Recreation again for their wonderful job sponsoring it. We want to thank CATS, Community Access Television, for videotaping this program. And we want to thank the Monroe County Public Library for letting us use this facility on such a rainy night. Be careful going home. Watch out for the shadows out there. Good night.